Welcome to a realm where nightmares breathe and shadows whisper. Tonight, we plunge into a tale that will chill your soul and haunt your dreams. Prepare yourself, for what you are about to witness is not for the faint-hearted. In this darkness, every shadow has a story, and every whisper holds a secret. Are you ready to face the unknown? Turn off the lights, and let the terror begin. Stay with us, if you dare, but remember, once you step into this world, there's no escape. Welcome to Room 13 channel, where fear becomes your only companion. Climbing a mountain can be the ultimate test of endurance and courage. For me, it was a journey into the unknown, with the promise of reaching the summit as my guiding star. Little did I know, the real challenge lay in what I would find at the top. The day began with clear skies and a light breeze, perfect weather for climbing. As I strapped on my gear and started the ascent, the excitement was palpable. The mountain was known for its beauty and difficulty, and I was eager to conquer it. The climb was tough but manageable. Hours passed, and I could feel the thinning air, the strain in my muscles. Yet, I pressed on, each step bringing me closer to the peak. But as I approached the summit, the atmosphere changed. The sky darkened, and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring everything around me. A strange silence settled, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot. It felt like the mountain was holding its breath, waiting. My heart pounded, a mix of anticipation and unease. Then, I saw a figure standing at the very edge of the summit. At first, I thought it was another climber, but as I got closer, I realized something was off. The figure was dressed in old, tattered clothing, out of place in the present day. My pulse quickened. Who could it be? With each step, the figure became clearer. It was a man, but his face was pale and expressionless, like a mask. He seemed to be staring into the distance, unaware of my presence. I called out, but there was no response. The air grew colder, biting into my skin. An overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. Something was very wrong. As I reached the summit, the man slowly turned to face me. His eyes, dark and hollow, bore into mine, sending a chill down my spine. There was no life in them, just an empty void. My breath caught in my throat. Panic gripped me, and I took a step back. Then, without warning, he pointed towards the horizon. My eyes followed, but all I saw was fog and shadows. I turned back to the figure, but he was gone, vanished into thin air. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? The cold intensified, and the fog seemed to close in around me. I stumbled back, desperate to leave the summit. The way down was treacherous, the path obscured by the thickening fog. My heart pounded in my ears, the memory of those lifeless eyes haunting me. I moved as quickly as I could, slipping and sliding on the icy slope. As I descended, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air was heavy, oppressive. It was as if the mountain itself was alive, aware of my every move. The further I went, the stronger the sensation became. It wasn't until I reached the tree line that the feeling finally lifted. Back at base camp, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was the altitude or the fatigue, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. I shared my experience with a local guide, hoping for an explanation. His face grew serious. He told me about an old legend of a climber who had perished at the summit long ago. Some say his spirit still haunts the peak, appearing to those who dare to reach the top. I shuddered. Had I seen the ghost of that climber? The thought sent a wave of fear through me. I had survived the climb, but the encounter left a mark that wouldn't fade. The summit, once a symbol of triumph, had become a place of eerie mystery. As I left the mountain behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unfinished business. The figure's silent gesture, pointing towards the horizon, lingered in my mind. What had he been trying to show me? Was there something more to the story? In the end, I realized that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The mountain held its secrets close, and perhaps it was better that way. For those who seek adventure, be warned, not all summits offer the victory you expect. Sometimes they bring you face to face with the unknown, leaving you with more questions than answers. And if you ever find yourself on that mountain, standing at the summit, remember this story. Keep your eyes open, and beware of what you might see. Because some encounters are more than just a ghostly vision, they are a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Have you ever been drawn to something despite knowing the dangers? That was how we felt about the haunted peak, a mountain notorious for its eerie legends and unexplained disappearances. Yet, the allure of conquering the unknown was too strong to resist. Our team consisted of 4 seasoned climbers: Mark, Sarah, Alex, and me, Lisa. We had tackled many mountains before, but none like this. As we set out, the local villagers warned us about the peak. They spoke of spirits that guarded the mountain, trapping those who dared to disturb them. We laughed it off, attributing their stories to mere superstition. But as we began our ascent, a creeping sense of unease took hold. The first day was uneventful, but the atmosphere grew heavier as we climbed. The air felt charged, almost electric. Strange shadows flitted at the edges of our vision, vanishing when we tried to focus on them. By nightfall, a thick mist enveloped us, and the temperature dropped sharply. We set up camp, huddling around a small fire. The usual camaraderie was replaced with silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. As the night deepened, we heard a faint whispering, like wind through the trees, but more distinct. It seemed to come from all around us, a chorus of voices murmuring just out of comprehension. Sarah, ever the rationalist, dismissed it as the wind, but the rest of us exchanged uneasy glances. The stories we had laughed at earlier now felt all too real. The next day, the climb became more challenging. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep drops. The mist persisted, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Mark led the way, his usually confident demeanor replaced with a grim determination. As we ascended, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to call our names, a beckoning pull that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, Alex slipped. He caught himself just in time, but his face was pale. "Did you hear that?" he gasped. We all nodded. It wasn't just whispers now. There were distinct words, warnings to turn back, to leave while we still could. The mist thickened, swirling around us like a living thing. It was then that we realized we weren't just climbing a mountain. We were intruding on something far older and darker. As we neared the summit, the whispers turned into a cacophony. It was as if the mountain was alive, speaking through the wind, the rocks, the very air around us. We reached a plateau and stopped to catch our breath. That's when we saw them figures moving in the mist. At first, we thought they were other climbers, but as they came closer, we realized they were not of this world. Pale and translucent, they moved with an eerie grace. Their faces were void of emotion, eyes hollow and haunting. One figure, a woman in tattered climbing gear, stepped forward, Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Yet, we understood her message clearly: leave or join us. Panic set in. We turned to descend, but the path was gone, swallowed by the mist. The figures closed in, their whispers now a wailing chorus. The air grew colder, the ground beneath us shaking. It felt like the mountain was trying to trap us, pulling us deeper into its grasp. In a desperate bid to escape, we retraced our steps, but the terrain had changed. The familiar route was now an endless maze of fog and shadows. Sarah, trying to stay calm, suggested we stop and regroup, but the presence of the figures made it impossible to think clearly. They circled us, their whispers a constant, oppressive force. Mark, always the strongest among us, began to falter. He spoke of seeing faces in the mist, friends and loved ones long gone, beckoning him to follow. He started walking toward them, and it took all our strength to pull him back. It was then that we realized the truth. The mountain was feeding on our fears, using our memories against us. As darkness fell, we set up a makeshift camp, our nerves frayed. We huddled together, barely speaking, listening to the relentless whispers. They spoke of the mountain's past, of climbers lost to madness, of souls trapped forever in the mist. It was as if the mountain itself was alive, a malevolent force that thrived on our terror. In the dead of night, the whispers suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening, a void that filled us with dread. Then, without warning, the ground beneath us gave way. We tumbled down a hidden crevice, landing in a cold, dark cavern. We were trapped, with no way out. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and bitter. We turned on our headlamps, illuminating the cavern. What we saw chilled us to the bone. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, depicting scenes of sacrifice and rituals. In the center of the cavern stood a stone altar, stained dark with age. It was clear we had stumbled upon something ancient, something forbidden. The figures reappeared, standing silently on the altar. The woman from before stepped forward, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. She raised a hand, pointing to the altar, and I understood. This was their domain, a place where the living had no business being. We had disturbed something we couldn't comprehend, and now we had to pay the price. But then, in the flickering light, I noticed something strange. The carvings on the walls seemed to change, shifting and moving as if alive. The whispers returned, but this time they were different. They spoke of an escape, a way to appease the spirits and leave the mountain. We had to complete the ritual, to offer something in exchange for our freedom. Mark, still in a daze, approached the altar. He placed his climbing gear on it, muttering an apology. The air around us seemed to vibrate, the mist swirling faster. The figures remained still, watching us with those empty eyes. We followed Mark's lead, placing our own items on the altar. The whispers rose to a crescendo, then abruptly stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the figures began to fade, dissolving into the mist. The cavern walls shuddered, the ground beneath us trembling. A bright light filled the space, blinding us. When it faded, we found ourselves back on the mountain trail, the mist gone, the whispers silenced. We stumbled down the mountain, our minds reeling. What had just happened? Had we really encountered spirits, or was it all an illusion? The villagers greeted us with a mixture of relief and wariness. They listened to our tale, nodding solemnly. They knew the mountain's secrets, secrets that we had barely escaped. As we left the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left something behind. The mountain had let us go, but at a cost. The items we placed on the altar are gear. Our mementos felt like a small price to pay for our lives. But deep down, I knew we had given more than that. We had left a part of ourselves on that haunted peak, a part that would always remain. To this day, the memories of that climb haunt me. The faces in the mist, the whispers in the wind, the feeling of being watched, they all linger at the edges of my mind. I can never forget the terror of that journey into darkness, nor the realization that we were at the mercy of forces beyond our understanding. So, if you ever find yourself drawn to the haunted peak, remember our story. The mountain may seem like just another challenge, but it's more than that. It's a place where the lines between the living and the dead blur, where the spirits of the past still roam. And if you disturb them, they might just decide to keep you forever. Have you ever felt a thrill so intense that it borders on fear? That's how we felt as we began our climb on the haunted heights, a set of cliffs known for their treacherous paths and chilling legends. We were experienced climbers, but nothing could have prepared us for the nightmare that awaited. The day started with a bright, promising sunrise. Our team, Josh, Mia, Ben, and Emma, was eager to conquer the infamous cliffs. We had heard the stories, tales of climbers who experienced strange phenomena, of voices echoing in the wind, and of shadows that moved on their own. But we were skeptics, ready to debunk the myths with our courage and skill. The climb was challenging from the start. The cliffs were steep, with narrow ledges and loose rocks that threatened to give way at any moment. As we ascended, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks and crevices. It seemed to carry whispers, faint and unintelligible, but unsettling nonetheless. Mia, always the cautious one, suggested we take it slow. We agreed, focusing on each handhold and foothold, the tension palpable. But as we reached a particularly narrow ledge, Ben froze. He stared down at the drop below, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. We all stopped, listening. At first, there was only the wind. But then, we heard ita faint, eerie laughter, carried on the breeze. It seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the cliffs. We exchanged uneasy glances, trying to rationalize it as just the wind playing tricks. We pushed on, but the atmosphere grew heavier. The air seemed colder, the wind harsher. As we reached a small plateau, we decided to rest and regroup. That's when we saw a shadowy figure standing on a ledge above us. It was barely visible, but there was no mistaking its outline. A person, another climber, but how did they get there? Josh called out, but there was no response. The figure remained still, watching us. Then, in an instant, it vanished. We were left in stunned silence. Mia tried to brush it off as a trick of the light, but the unease lingered. Something was wrong with these cliffs. As we continued, the paranormal activity intensified. We heard footsteps above us, but no one was there. Rocks tumbled down the slopes, narrowly missing us. Shadows flickered in the corners of our eyes, only to disappear when we looked directly at them. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, as if the cliffs themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Night fell quickly, casting long shadows over the cliffs. We set up a small camp on a relatively flat ledge, too shaken to climb further. As we sat around our portable stove, the laughter returned louder this time, closer. It sounded mocking, like it was taunting us. Suddenly, the ground beneath Mia crumbled. She screamed, grabbing onto a jutting rock just in time. We rushed to help, pulling her back to safety. But as we did, the fog cleared for a moment, revealing the shadowy figure again this time, standing right behind us. It was close enough that we could see its features, a gaunt face, hollow eyes, and a twisted smile. It was no living person, that much was clear. The figure raised a hand, pointing down the cliff, then slowly dissolved into the mist. We were paralyzed with fear. What was that? The ghost? A hallucination? The realization hit us hard. We're not alone on these cliffs. The legends were true. The cliffs were haunted, and whatever was here didn't want us to leave. Josh, the most level-headed among us, took charge. "We need to get out of here now," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We packed up quickly, determined to descend as fast as possible. But the cliffs seemed to conspire against us. The path we'd taken up was gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. It was as if the cliffs were shifting, trapping us. As we carefully made our way down, the paranormal activity escalated. Rocks tumbled more frequently, the whispers turned into anguished cries, and the shadows seemed to follow us, growing darker and more defined. Every step was a battle against the elements and our own fear. At one point, Ben stumbled, almost losing his grip. He looked back at us wide-eyed. "It pushed me," he gasped. "Something pushed me." We didn't wait to find out what. We moved faster, our only thought to escape the haunted cliffs. Finally, after what felt like hours, we reached the base. The air was warmer, the whispers gone, but the sense of dread lingered. We looked up at the cliffs, shrouded in mist, and shuddered. We had survived, but we were shaken to our core. As we packed our gear and prepared to leave, Mia stopped suddenly. She pointed at a nearby rock formation. There, etched into the stone, were names and datus names of climbers who had disappeared on the cliffs over the years. And below them, fresh scratches in the rock, as if added recently. Our names with today's date. A cold realization washed over us. The cliffs had marked us, just as they had marked those before us. We had come close to joining the ranks of the lost, trapped by the sinister forces that haunted the heights. The cliffs had let us go, but not without a warning. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The cliffs loomed behind us, silent and foreboding. We had escaped, but the experience had changed us. The legends were real, and we had come face to face with them. And now, as I sit here recounting our ordeal, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left when we did. Would we have become another ghostly figure, another whisper in the wind? The haunted heights remain a place of mystery and danger, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs. So if you ever feel the urge to climb those cliffs, remember our story. Be cautious, be respectful, and be prepared. Because some heights are not meant to be conquered, and some nightmares are all too real. There's something haunting about a mountain shrouded in fog. It calls to the brave and curious, promising adventure, but often hiding danger. For years, the fog-covered peak of Mount Wraith has been a beacon for climbers seeking to conquer its elusive summit. Yet, not all who ventured up its slopes have returned. This is the story of the missing climbers and the ghostly clues they left behind. It was a cold, misty morning when our group set out. We were experienced climbers, each of us eager to take on Mount Wraith's challenges. Our team leader, Kevin, was particularly keen. He had heard the tales of those who vanished but dismissed them as exaggerated campfire stories. The rest of you, Sana, Mike, Rachel, and Ish shared his excitement, but couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling in our stomachs. As we began our ascent, the fog descended, wrapping us in a thick, ghostly blanket. Visibility dropped to a few feet, and the air grew heavy with moisture. Every step felt like walking into the unknown. The usual sounds of the forest bird song, rustling leaves were muffled, replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the mountain was holding its breath, waiting. By midday, we reached a plateau where we planned to set up camp. The fog was so dense that it seemed to absorb all sound. We called out to each other, voices echoing strangely. It felt like we were the only people left in the world, alone in a silent, grey void. Kevin tried to keep spirits high, cracking jokes and planning our route for the next day, but the mood was tense. As night fell, the fog thickened. We huddled around a small campfire, its light barely penetrating the gloom. Suddenly, we heard a faint, distant cry. At first, we thought it was an animal, but as we listened closer, the sound became unmistakable. It was a human voice, calling for help. We all looked at each other, eyes wide. Someone was out there, lost and afraid. Kevin grabbed his flashlight and started in the direction of the voice. The rest of us followed, stumbling through the dense fog. The cries grew louder, more desperate. They led us to a narrow ridge, perilous and steep. We moved carefully, calling out to whoever was in distress. But just as suddenly as it started, the voice stopped. We stood there breathless, listening to the oppressive silence. Then, we saw a faint, glowing light hovering in the fog ahead. It flickered like a lantern in the wind, swaying gently. We approached cautiously, expecting to find another group of climbers or perhaps a lost traveler. But when we reached the source of the light, there was nothing. No people, no lantern, just the fog and an inexplicable glow that faded into the mist. Perplexed and a little unnerved, we returned to camp. As we settled back in, Rachel pointed out something strange. On the ground near our tents, we found a trail of wet footprints, leading away into the fog. They were fresh to be from anyone in our group. The prints were small, like those of a child, and they stopped abruptly a few feet away, as if the person had vanished. The atmosphere grew tense. Kevin tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a trick of the light, he suggested, or our minds playing games in the fog. But none of us could shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The mountain felt alive, watching us, keeping secrets just out of reach. The next morning, we continued our climb, though the strange events of the night weighed heavily on our minds. The fog remained thick, limiting our visibility. As we ascended, we noticed something odd. The higher we climbed, the more frequently we found strange markings on the rock, symbols and crude drawings that looked ancient. They were eerie and unsettling, like warnings left by those who had come before. Around noon, we stumbled upon an old, weathered journal lying on a rock ledge. It was damp and fragile, the pages yellowed with age. The entries inside were written in a hurried, shaky hand. They spoke of a group of climbers who had reached the same ridge we had found, only to be lured by strange lights and whispers in the fog. The last entry was the most chilling. The mountain wants something. We can feel it. We must leave, but it's too late. We're being watched. The journal confirmed our worst fears. The tales of the missing climbers were true, and we were following in their footsteps. The realization hit us hard. What if we too became part of the mountain's mystery? The fog felt thicker than ever, almost tangible. The air was charged with a strange energy, and the whispers began again, soft and unintelligible. Then Anna screamed. We turned to see her pointing at a shadowy figure standing just a few feet away. It was tall and indistinct, more like a silhouette than a person. As we approached, it disappeared, leaving behind a chill in the air. We were all on edge, every sound amplified by the dense fog. The mountain felt like a trap, and we were its prey. We decided to descend, but the path seemed to have changed. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. The fog swirled around us, disorienting and oppressive. It felt like we were walking in circles, the same eerie whispers following us wherever we went. Then, we heard the cries for help again. This time, they were clearer, closer. Kevin, determined to find the source, led us towards the sound. We followed, hearts pounding, every nerve on edge. The cries grew louder, more frantic. But when we reached the spot, there was no one there, just an empty clearing and a faint smell of damp earth. We found more footprints, leading away into the fog. They seemed to dance and twist, as if leading us somewhere. We followed cautiously, the air thick with tension. Suddenly, the fog parted, revealing a hidden cave entrance. It was dark and foreboding, a gaping maw in the rock face. The footprints led straight inside. We hesitated, the air around us growing colder. But curiosity and a strange compulsion drove us forward. We entered the cave, our flashlights flickering in the darkness. The air was musty, filled with the sound of dripping water. As we ventured deeper, we found more symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the lights. At the end of the tunnel, we found a small chamber. In the center was a pile of old, tattered clothing and gear items from past climbers left behind. Among them were personal items, a watch, a compass, a journal. It was a shrine of sorts, a memorial to those who had vanished. We felt a deep sense of dread. This was a place of no return. As we stood there, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke in a language we couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. The mountain had claimed these souls, and now it wanted ours. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. The walls seemed to close in on us, the whispers becoming a cacophony of voices. Then, we saw them ghostly figures emerging from the walls, their faces pale and eyes hollow. They reached out, their mouths moving silently. It was the missing climbers, their spirits trapped in this forsaken place. We were surrounded, their presence overwhelming. Kevin shouted for us to run, and we did. We fled the cave, the voices and figures chasing us in the darkness. The fog outside was even thicker, but we pushed through, desperate to escape. Our hearts pounded in our chests, fear driving us forward. As we burst out into the open air, the fog suddenly lifted. The sun shone brightly, and the eerie silence was replaced by the sounds of nature. We were back at the base of the mountain, safe and alive. But the memory of what we had seen and felt stayed with us. We had survived, but the experience left a deep scar. We knew we had encountered something beyond our understanding, a mystery that would never be fully explained. The mountain had let us go, but we had seen the truth. Mount Wraith was a place where the living and the dead coexisted, where the fog was a veil between two worlds. As we left, we noticed something strange. The footprints we had followed out of the cave were gone, erased as if they had never existed. The mountain was silent, its secrets hidden once more. We could only wonder what fate awaited the next group of climbers drawn by the lure of the fog-covered peak. And so, the mystery of the missing climbers remains a dark legend that continues to haunt Mount Wraith. If you ever find yourself on that mountain, remember our story. Beware of the fog and listen closely to the whispers. Have you ever heard a story so chilling it stays with you long after? The tale of the Forgotten Expedition is one such story, a mystery that haunts the snowy peaks of Mount Elysium. An expedition team set out decades ago, only to vanish without a trace. What happened to them, and why do climbers still report eerie sightings on the mountain? It all began in the winter of 1965. A well-funded team of experienced mountaineers embarked on an ambitious climb to chart an uncharted route up Mount Elysium. The group, led by renowned climber James Thornton, was well prepared and highly skilled. They were determined to make history. However, as the days passed and communication with the team ceased, concern grew among those waiting at base camp. Weeks turned into months, and despite several search and rescue missions, no trace of the expedition was found. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. The case was eventually closed, labeled as an unfortunate accident. But the mountain held its secrets tightly, refusing to give any clues about what had happened to the climbers. Years went by, and the Forgotten Expedition became just that, a distant memory, a ghost story whispered among climbers. But then, strange things began to happen. Subsequent climbers reported seeing figures in the distance, dressed in old-fashioned climbing gear. They spoke of hearing faint voices in the wind, calling for help. The reports were eerily consistent, always near the same area where the expedition was last known to be. In the spring of 1982, another climbing team decided to investigate. They aimed to uncover the truth behind the legends and, if possible, find any remnants of the lost team. As they approached the region where the sightings were reported, the weather turned ominous. Thick clouds rolled in, and a heavy snowstorm began, much like the conditions described in the tales of the Forgotten Expedition. The team set up camp and prepared to wait out the storm. As night fell, the wind picked up, carrying with it strange, whispering voices. The climbers huddled in their tents, feeling an unsettling presence. In the middle of the night, one of the climbers, Sarah, woke up to a faint glow outside her tent. She peeked out and saw a dim light flickering in the distance, like an old lantern swaying in the wind. Curiosity got the better of her. She woke her companions, and they decided to investigate. The light led them up a steep incline, the wind howling around them. As they climbed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to communicate with them. They reached a small plateau, and there, in the snow, they saw footprints fresh and leading further up the mountain. They followed the footprints, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The path led them to a narrow crevice, partially hidden by snow and ice. As they approached, the wind seemed to die down, and the whispers ceased. The air was thick with tension. One of the climbers, Mark, shone his flashlight into the crevice and gasped. Inside, partially covered by snow, were the remains of a camp. Old tents, frayed and weathered, stood against the rock face. Scattered around were pieces of equipment, an ice axe or rope, and other climbing gear, all from a bygone era. It was the camp of the Forgotten Expedition, preserved in the cold embrace of the mountain. The team was both relieved and horrified. They had found the lost climbers, or at least their camp. But where were the bodies? As they searched, they felt a sudden chill, colder than the mountain air. They turned to see faint, shadowy figures standing at the edge of the plateau, watching them. The figures were translucent, their faces pale and expressionless. They wore the same old-fashioned climbing gear that had been reported in the sightings. The climbers froze, unable to move. The figures slowly raised their hands, pointing towards the crevice. The meaning was clear. This was their final resting place, a grave marked only by the mountain's silence. The climbers felt an overwhelming sadness, a sense of unfinished business. It was as if the ghosts of the forgotten expedition were trapped, unable to find peace. The figures began to fade, merging with the swirling snow. The climbers took this as a sign to leave. They descended quickly, the weight of their discovery heavy on their minds. Back at base camp, they shared their findings. The authorities later recovered the remains and equipment, confirming the identity of the lost team. But the mystery was far from solved. Why had the expedition vanished? What had caused their demise? The climbers could only speculate. Some believed the team had succumbed to the harsh conditions, while others whispered of a curse, a malevolent force that guarded the mountain. The truth remained elusive, buried in the ice and snow. As the years passed, the sightings continued. Climbers reported seeing ghostly figures, hearing whispers in the wind, and feeling an eerie presence on the mountain. The area where the camp was found became known as the Ghost Zone, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead seemed to blur. Today, the story of the forgotten expedition serves as a cautionary tale. Mount Elysium is still a popular destination for adventurers, but those who venture into the Ghost Zone do so with a sense of reverence and caution. The mountain's secrets remain, a haunting reminder of those who were lost. And so, the ghosts of the forgotten expedition linger, their story incomplete. They are a part of the mountain now, an eternal presence in the frozen heights. The sightings, the whispers, the shadows, they are all echoes of a mystery that may never be fully understood. For those who dare to climb Mount Elysium, remember, the mountain is watching, and some who enter may never truly leave. Thanks for joining us on this spine-chilling journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed these eerie tales and spine-tingling stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Have your own creepy experiences or know a legend that needs to be told? Drop them in the comments or send us a message. And remember, the world is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Stay curious, stay cautious, and until next time, keep your lights on and your eyes open. Sweet nightmares.